Record to the clap.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning or afternoon or evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bill Woodcock, and you are watching or listening to another edition of the Forward Maryland podcast. With me, as always, to kick off the 300 episodes of Forward Maryland is my intrepid co-host, Steve Hunt. Steve, how's your weekend going?
Weekend is going good. The Orioles shockingly have won the first two games in Houston versus the first place in the entire American League, Astros. Going for the sweep today, although Verlander's on the bump for the Stros, so we'll see how that goes. But look, it's the O's winning, it's the Ravens winning, preseason game number 58 in a row or whatever it is. But you know what the talk is in Charm City? Poe. Prayers up to Baltimore Ravens mascot Poe, who apparently tore an ACL. Harbaugh is going to give the results of the MRI on Monday, I believe, at his press conference. But prayers up, Poe. Hopefully you're recovering and getting better soon.
I was watching that mascot violence in the background during the Ravens game as the announcers were talking at halftime. And first off, what struck me was that for some reason, the University of Delaware Blue Hen dwarfed all other mascots, was like twice the size of all other mascots, which seemed to me, one, unfair, two, creepy. And then Poe got knocked down, and then all the other mascots ran off, the coyote, the Oriole bird, a ram, and I don't even know what school in Maryland has a ram, but the Morgan State Bear ran off, and Poe laid on the field, crumpled up like a squashed bug. And I was like, I think Poe's really hurt.
Hey, let me tell you something. As a former student of the University of Delaware, don't sleep on UD. That chicken is a tough customer. Dance, chicken, dance, okay?
Have you ever been a mascot, Steve?
I've never been a mascot.
It is athletic. I have never either, but it is athletic. I'm going to ask our guest today, Byron, have you ever been a mascot for anything?
I can't say I have.
Yes?
No, I can't say
no?
I have. No.
Unfortunate.
No.
Well, I can tell you, it seems kind of athletic and arduous. So, yes, we wish Poe well. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring in our honored guest, return guest to the podcast, so he gets to be part of the semi-witty front-end banter. Howard County Register of Wills and a very good friend of the podcast, Byron Macfarlane. Byron, welcome to the podcast today.
Great to be here with you guys. Thank you for the invitation.
And so we are here today to talk about the ballot referenda in the state of Maryland. Now, there are 5 ballot referenda for the voters of Maryland to vote yay or nay upon on November 8th. And amazingly, they have not gotten any media, any press. Steve, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen anybody talking about anything having to do with any of these referenda, considering that there are some weighty issues such as the legalization of recreational marijuana, no small thing for the state of Maryland. Have you seen anything about these referenda, Steve?
The only one is about the cannabis legislation. You'll see some noise on Twitter here and there. There are a couple of the delegates who are definitely pushing it. It got a little quiet towards primary day, understandably so, because some of the folks from Annapolis pushing it, had elections to worry about. But really, that's the only one throughout the cycle that I've heard about, and I've heard any noise about in terms of the referendum that are out there.
Yeah. So question number 5 on this fall's general election ballot is specific to Howard County, and it would remove the responsibility it would relieve orphans court responsibilities, and we're going to get to an explanation of what those are, from the judges of the orphans court of Howard County, and put those responsibilities in the hands of Howard County Circuit Court judges. So our Register of Wills here in Howard County, Byron Macfarlane, is an advocate of question 5, and in all in all fairness and disclosure, Steve and I are too. But we want to have a discussion to educate voters as to what question 5 is. So Byron, take it away. What is question 5? Why did it come about, and how did it get to the point of being a referendum here in the fall?
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me and for talking about this issue. You're right that, these referenda really get overlooked. And this is an important issue for people in Howard County. This is the most important judicial reform that our county has had in probably 50 years. And question 5 will ask the voters to decide whether to end, as you said, Bill, end elections of orphans court judges and vest all of that authority in the circuit court. This is something that's already done in Montgomery County and Harford County and has been for decades. This would follow what most states do. So it's 36 states plus DC all use some trial court, like a circuit court, to handle probate matters. It's only 14 states that use some kind of specialty court, like a probate court. And Howard County is one of only 19 counties out of over 2,000 in America that uses a court without lawyer judges. And all 19 of those are in Maryland, by the way. So we're this kind of anomaly. And so you ask, how did this come about? It's that we are really out here in left field in how we approach our judicial consideration of these matters. So the question for voters, again, is, whether to restructure how we handle probate matters in Howard County. It will be before all the voters of the state. The way this works is that, Maryland, as you two may know, and some people may know, Maryland has the longest constitution in the country. And we have all kinds of weird stuff in there. Like there's stuff about parking in Baltimore that's in our constitution. But obviously this has to do with the structure of our judiciary. So it's in the Constitution. This is exactly what happened. Question 5 is exactly what was put before the voters in Montgomery County and Harford County back in the 60s and 70s when they did this. The way it works is that because it's in the Constitution, everyone in the state has to vote on it. Because it's a local issue, it has to pass not only statewide, but also with a majority vote in the jurisdiction affected. So for this to pass, we need a majority vote in Howard County and a majority vote statewide. The last time this was on the ballot, it passed with over 70% of the vote and a stronger vote in the jurisdiction affected. So, I'm very optimistic about this passing. Where did this come? How did this come about? I think that's a really important question. I touched on the fact that we are this outlier in how we approach probate matters. That is something that we have been aware of for a very long time. What has become more apparent, though, over time is that this institution, it's called the Orphans Court. I can't think of any worse name for this court because it doesn't actually have anything to do with orphans, nothing at all. So when our starting point is that the name of this court has nothing to do with what it actually does, we're not off to a great start, right? And that presents, I think, ultimately, really as a fundamental issue, a small d democratic problem. We elect people to an office that no one understands what it does. Is that right? I don't think so. At least with my office register of wills, people think it has something to do with dealing with wills. Well, you're in the right direction, right? Sheriff, people think law enforcement. State's attorney, they think something about prosecuting. Clerk, they think something about, being a repository of records. All of that is right, but Orphans Court is such a bizarre misnomer. That's not a good start. Obviously, also, no one knows who these candidates are. Also not a good start, that we're electing people who no one knows who they are. Generally speaking, these elections are not contested. Or you may only have 4 people run, as we did this year, for 3 positions. Not bad if you're the one running for office and all you have to do is come in 3rd place. It's not bad. I'm used to running where you've got to come in first and there's only one winner. So that's not good for kind of small d democracy. And then ultimately, sort of day in, day out, the problem is this. We have a system that was designed literally when America was founded. So we're talking about about 250 years ago. This system was borrowed from England and its lineage goes all the way back to the 13th century. That's how old this system is, where you have non-lawyer judges presiding over probate matters. That's how far back we go. And, this is the only part of our entire state judiciary that has undergone no changes whatsoever since our state's founding. All of our appellate courts, our trial courts, the district court didn't even exist until 50 years ago. Our intermediate appellate court didn't exist until a few decades ago. All of these institutions have gone through serious changes over time, but not this one. And the reason for that is simple, is that these courts are made up of elected officials. And if you go back and you look at the history of our orphans court judges in Howard County, you would not be surprised to find, Warfields and Skaggs and other famous landowning names of families in Howard County. No surprise there at all, right? And so that's why these positions have never been touched, is that they're, and I'll say that, during the course of the legislative process that led us to this referenda, not only did our judges, but orphans court judges all over the state called in all of their political favors to try to stop this. I mean, that's what's happened here. And there's something very unseemly and I think even borderline unethical about that. That's certainly not the kind of, do we want judges acting as politicians? And the answer is absolutely no. I mean, we see that at the Supreme Court, right? I mean, we've got a couple of judges on the Supreme Court who are absolutely, they would be better positioned in the Senate than on the Supreme Court because they have a clear policy objective, right? We don't want people like that in our judiciary. And that gets to sort of, should we elect judges, period? If you talk to, we just had a contested circuit court election, and those are contentious every time they come up. The judges don't like having to run. They don't like having to raise money. They think it's unseemly. It's a strange thing to run for an office where you say, vote for me, I'll be fair. People generally are asking for candidates who are running, like, what are you going to do for me? I'll be fair for you. Okay, that's not really getting me going here. And that obviously opens up, other ethical issues. One of the orphans court candidates running in Howard County this year, her treasurer is a lawyer who goes before this court on a regular basis. I think that's a problem, So we have, and these aren't individual problems with the judges, it's a systemic problem. Right. And so, and the last thing I'll say is on why we are here is that having a panel of 3 judges who aren't required to be lawyers and who, even if they are lawyers, don't have to have any special training in probate law or in how to be a judge, how to be fair, how to be impartial, how to dispense with matters promptly, how to weigh, should I have a hearing or not? Should I hold this up or let it go? That system, where you have 3 people who are sort of natural electoral enemies on top of that, and let's throw in that one of them gets appointed chief judge by the governor. You have a system that is, you've got people who aren't really qualified for the work, or aren't necessarily going to be qualified for the work. And then you've got a system that by design is going to have intense interpersonal conflict. And that has been the case in our orphans court for decades. This is not anything recent at all. It goes back into the 80s and 90s, as far as I know. So that's why we're here. It's, do we want a more professional system that has sort of kept up with the times, or do we want to keep something that hasn't changed since, before women could vote?
Byron, thank you so much for that explanation and exposition on not just the orphans court, but also on the circuit court, and how both interplay with your office in terms of administering matters of people's property and livelihood, and how their assets are to be distributed after they die. And as Steve and I have both had up close and personal interactions with the registrar's office and with the orphans court. And you're right, they do require a good bit of tact, diplomacy, sound judgment, and leadership. I just want to pull a few threads. But when you mentioned, I mean, and just to confirm, when you mentioned that the orphans court judges, I mean, they're perfect they can be perfect lay people, right? I mean, absolutely no legal training. This is any man or woman off the street job can do, right?
Yeah, the only constitutional requirement to be an orphans court judge is that you have lived in Howard County for a year before the election.
And you mentioned that, and you mentioned the election, and that they're of course elected in the state and local cycles, but the election is also partisan, which you alluded to in by talking about how political are, but they are in fact partisan, and these folks often appear on the up and down ballots of party slates.
Yeah.
So we're talking patronage positions in many respects. My word, not yours, but it can be fairly easy to see where people who may not know a lot about what they're doing, get on a slate because, well, they've done something for somebody further up on that slate.
Yeah. If I can jump in there, Bill, you're absolutely right, because I mean, I actually went on the Maryland State Board of Elections website to just remind myself of the names of the people who were running. And, Byron, I know you can attest to this as well. The only candidates running were Democratic candidates. There were no Republican candidates running at all. And I can tell you from my experience running in 2018, and Byron, you've run several times, we go to a lot of these functions for different candidates and things of that nature. And at those candidates are these candidates for judge of the orphans court. They're there, working the room and, getting it good with certain electeds and, stronger candidates. I'm sure, Byron, you've been chatted up by many of these individuals. So, Bill, to your point, yes, very partisan.
Right. So and what could be a Democratic versus Republican way of how to administer probate? I absolutely have no idea. Byron, the last thing I want to ask, and before I turn it over to Steve, is that the circuit court judges in Howard County, I used to know how many there are. I want to say there's 4. I don't know if that's 5. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that a negative comment about this referendum would be it would overload the workload of the circuit court judges. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something that opponents of this have been saying from day one, is that, the orphans court has so much work, it would overwhelm the circuit courts. They couldn't possibly handle it. Facts are important. And the fact is that over the last 10 years, the average new caseload for our circuit court in Howard County has been about 8,000 cases a year. The new caseload for our orphans court has been about 200 a year. You do the math, that's a little over 2% increase for the circuit court to take over the work of the orphans court. You kind of do the math a little bit more and you figure out how much time is that going to take. It would take the circuit court about an hour a week to take care of the work of the orphans court. On average, they have 1 or 2 hearings a week, and they only have about, I think on average, 14 kind of administrative matters that are put before them to sign off on. And I can tell you, having talked to some of the circuit court judges, this is not to say they have an opinion on this one way or the other, but they have a large caseload. But, I think what's also important to keep in mind is that, I said 8,000 cases is the average. These cases are not divorce hearings. They're not criminal murder trials. The vast majority of matters that go before the orphans court are very simple. Sometimes they're complicated, but what's important for the public to know is that it is the case now, and it has always been the case, that the most complex cases to go before the orphans court are routinely transmitted to the circuit court anyway. I mean, it is, how bizarre is it that we have a specialty court, this one court that handles this one issue in Howard County, that, you'd think, okay, my mom died and I want to fight her will. My brother and sister and I are going to fight over whether the will is valid. That issue, I mean, we're talking about the big kahuna in any kind of probate matter, challenging someone's final wishes. You know, you'd think the probate court would handle that, right? No, it doesn't do that. Those matters always go to the circuit, or almost always go to the circuit court for adjudication. So what we're left with is a redundancy. You know, we've got a court that you know, its workload is kind of scaled down just to these small number of uncontroversial cases and things that, you know, you may have a case where you've got, you know, mom dies without a will, and let's just say my brother and I want to fight over who's going to be the executor. Well, there'd be a hearing over that. It should probably take 15 minutes. And the court would decide, you know, is one of us best suited to do it? Or are neither of us capable and we've got to appoint some impartial third party? Well, that's simple enough to decide. And that's something that the circuit court could handle easily. So why do we need this whole other court to do it? So long story short is that, and let me also point out that the, again, and to give a comparison of caseload, the circuit court in Howard County has more hearings in any given day than the orphans court does in an entire year. So we're talking about a really, you know, we get back to like, why are we electing people to do this really, in the grand scheme of things, trivial amount of work when we have the circuit court already there, fully equipped to handle all of this. And, you know, historically, when this happened in Montgomery County and Harford County, those courts were not overwhelmed. They handled it. And, you know, those are two jurisdictions where we looked particularly at Harford County in trying to figure out how would this work here. And what we found was that their circuit court, sitting as their orphans court, had more hearings and they adjudicated them more quickly. And that on average, the amount of time from someone filing something to it being resolved by the court was half of what it is in Howard County. So, you know, it's a demonstrably better system. And the argument that it would overwhelm the circuit court, that is simply a red herring. That is simply not true.
And I can speak to that from firsthand experience, Byron. I mean, I can remember when I was custodian of property over, which is the Maryland term for executor, over my dad and my grandmother's estate. It took me maybe, you know, I remember working very closely with the registrar's office to make sure that the forms were filled out correctly, the spreadsheets made sense, everything added up. There was the evidence there of checks that were written and things were paid and notices put in the proper places. But I believe the amount of time spent by the orphans court itself on both of those cases combined was about 2 minutes. Probably just about enough to get a signature and a stamp saying this is right and the estates can now be closed. Steve, what questions do you have?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And by the way, because there's really no general election, because there were no Republican candidates, the three winners of the primaries actually going to go through it. And I will just say on behalf of my partner here, you know, Judges Bostic, Fitch, and Miller are more than welcome to come onto the show if you would like to. I guess we'll get all legal here and make the case for why this change should not happen. So we certainly, you know, you're more than welcome to come on and you know, give the other side of it if you do have that other side. So just to be clear, Byron, if this legislation, if this referendum is passed, it would effectively eliminate this particular court. So these three judges would no longer, you know, be on the bench. This whole organization, for lack of a better word, would just go away. Correct?
Right. And if I could just a quick correction.
Sure.
The one candidate, Christine Bostic, has been removed from the ballot. She didn't file either of her pre-primary finance reports and racked up a bunch of fines, and because of that was removed from the ballot because she refused to pay them. And the Democratic Central Committee nominated the fourth place candidate from the primary, Jill A. Brown, as the third slot on the. So Mrs. Brown will appear on the ballot.
I'm just going to make on an aside. In 35 years of Maryland political involvement, that is literally the first time I have ever heard of a candidate being removed from the ballot because of their failure to deal with the campaign finance forms and just the reports. It's absurd.
Bill, when this happened, I asked around friends all over the state, and no one had ever heard of this happening before. And
right.
I mean, frankly, I wasn't surprised that if it were any office.
But to me, I don't want to be seen as casting aspersions on the other two folks, but that speaks for viewers and listeners. To me, that speaks to the point of the fitness of this office, and how I'm just going to say it, what this office draws as terms of people who are interested to run for it. So anyway, I'm sorry. I'm agape at that. I didn't know that it was because of the campaign finance reports.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't do what, I mean, you had someone who, and this candidate, is a lawyer. One of the arguments that I've heard about in opposition to this measure is, well, one of the problems is that we have non-lawyer judges, and that we have lawyer judges who don't have any kind of expertise in probate law, which leads to making misinterpretations of the law, which leads to erroneous errors, mistakes that are chronic. The solution I've heard is, well, why don't we just make them all lawyers? Why don't we just do what Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Prince George's have done, which is by constitutional amendment require their orphans court judges to be lawyers? Why don't we just do that? Well, we had 3 candidates this time slate up as 3 lawyers and said, well, vote for us, we'll fix everything. Well, one of them, I mean, like you said, Bill, in my 20 plus years in politics, I've never heard of someone being thrown off the ballot and without, getting too much into, I don't want to tell any tales out of school, but she, I think, fundamentally didn't think that she had to do this. And she can come on and defend herself till she's blue in the face, but never heard of this in my life. But yeah, I mean, the fact that you have someone who is a lawyer running for judge, not following basic, it takes you 5 seconds to file an affidavit of limited contributions. Steve and Bill, you both know, this is not rocket science here. It's something that, as a candidate, you must do. And it's also a matter of transparency. What are you saying to the public as a candidate for judge, much less any other office? I'm not going to follow the law, number one. Number two, when I'm told, hey, you have to do this and there's going to be consequences, well, go kick rocks. And then, I'm not going to tell you who's giving me money. Like, we got some serious problems here.
A child could do these forms. Steve, I'm so sorry because we are both arguing.
No.
I'm sorry. I'll shut up.
No, but Bill, this really lends to the absurdity, and I'm just going to say it straight up, the absurdity of what's going on here. So, and Byron and Bill, just jump in if I'm seeing things wrong here. You have a position that deals in legal matters where the sitting individuals may or may not be lawyers, and if they are, they may or may not be specialists in probate matters, which is the focus of this organization. And one of the 3 people who are going to be sitting in this chair were appointed by members of a party central committee who may or may not even know what this job is and what it does. So one of the 3 people who make these decisions, albeit 200 cases, light caseload, but one of the 3 people making these decisions are appointed by a party committee. I mean, this stuff just writes itself,
I think if I could just,
I know many of the people on the Central Committee. I like them, but do I want them appointing judges?
Well, and I think that you bring up a really important point, Steve, which is, and I think this is important for anyone watching or listening to know, the difference between how someone becomes an orphans court judge versus someone who becomes a district court judge or circuit court judge or appellate judge. For the orphans court, you have to, basically come in at least 3rd place in the majority party in the county you're running in. Surprise, surprise, that all of the orphans court judges in Garrett County are Republicans, and all of the orphans court judges in Prince George's County are Democrats. Surprise, surprise there. So that's how you get to become an orphans court judge. To become any other kind of judge, you have to be nominated, you have to be reviewed and scrutinized and vetted by what's called a judicial nominating commission. You are interviewed by the state and local bar associations. You're interviewed by the specialty bars, the LGBTQ bar. In Howard County, we have the Waring-Mitchell Law Society, which is our African-American law society. You go through the ringer before you are ultimately appointed by the governor to those positions. So we're talking about a stark contrast in how someone becomes one kind of judge versus all the rest. And so do I think that someone who won't even file, campaign reports, is that person going to, survive the scrutiny of a nominating commission and, all the people who have a role to play in whether that person gets that position? I don't think so. I've never sat on one of those commissions, but those positions are competitive. And when you've got a lot of people, with their hands in a lot of people weighing in on it, I think that you end up with a lot better, I look at our circuit court, we've got 5 great judges, and I would trust any of them to handle these kinds of matters over really what I think of as an electoral roll of the dice on what hodgepodge of 3 people you might get on an orphans court.
No, I appreciate that. And again, just to clarify for the listeners out there or viewers, it doesn't seem to be, and you certainly are closer to this than anybody as our Register of Wills. If I'm a citizen and I need a matter resolved, it doesn't strike me as if I'm going to get, less in the way of quality of service. I'm not going to be waiting a year versus a month. It's not going to affect my ability to get my family matter or whatever that matter is resolved if it's handled by the circuit court as opposed to this orphans court. I say the name and I laugh because you're right. The naming of it is insane, but it doesn't sound like it's going to impact me in a negative way if it's now handled by the circuit court as opposed to this current orphans court.
No, and it's really the opposite. This is going to be a benefit to people, is that they're going to have their matters resolved more quickly. One of the problems that we have with this court is that, again, this is a systemic problem, is that it is a part-time court. It meets for part of one day a week and not every week of the year. So, once the court has finished their session each Wednesday, if someone comes in to file something and maybe it's a very simple matter and maybe it's time sensitive and it comes in on Thursday afternoon, I have to tell that person, you've got to wait until Wednesday. Well, why is that? Because our court isn't here for the next 5 days. And that's not right. The way it works in Harford County is just like in Howard County, they've got a dedicated session day for the court, right? But if there is an emergency matter or something that's time sensitive, the registrar's office has a relationship with the circuit court where, they can run an order up to the circuit court and get it signed promptly. And so that's the kind of system that I envision that we'll have in Howard County, where, people think that, we often have people who they are visiting Howard County short term to deal with a loved one's estate. And sometimes they actually really do need something dealt with immediately. Now, most probate matters are handled exclusively administratively by the Register of Wills. So we're there, 40 hours a week. We're there, Monday through Friday to help people and get them what they need. But the missing link is that, we don't have access to this court every day. In Harford County and Montgomery County, they do. So, far from it being, this isn't going to hurt anyone, it's really going to help people. And in addition to all of that, Howard County's orphans court is the only orphans court in the state that has a local rule, which is illegal, by the way, but that's a whole other thing. Orphans courts aren't allowed to create local rules, but our court has a local rule. They hold all petitions and motions for 20 days before they make a decision. It's the only orphans court in the state that does that, only one. So you may have an estate where mom dies, I am the sole heir, and I file a petition for attorney's fees or a petition to sell property or something like that. Even if I'm the only interested person, the court will sit and wait 20 days before they render a decision on that. And I have done my best to try to work with the court to try to make some changes, and it just, nope, that's what we're doing. And, again, there are so few people that go in front of them. I think there's absolutely some degree of a lack of accountability. I always tell people, it's like if my office were doing a really bad job, or the clerk's office or one of our delegates wasn't being responsive to constituent concerns, we'd hear about it and there'd be consequences for us, right? But when you've got a court that, who's going to go out in public and criticize a judge for taking a long time to resolve something? No one, especially not lawyers. We have to walk a very fine line being critical of judges, especially if it's a matter, where the judge hasn't made a decision yet, or we have a pending matter before them. So it's a fraught system from start to finish.
Wow. Again, as you drill this down, I mean, obviously there's the political piece of this, but just the piece of this, when you just talk about it from a practical standpoint and breaking it down, I mean, it's a part-time position. They're only in a certain amount of time as a part-time position. The amount of time you have to wait, and you're right. If somebody's coming in from Washington State to resolve something, they can't afford to, probably cannot afford to book a hotel room for, God knows how long, waiting these X number of days. So it sounds like not only is this a resolution to a political matter that is way off the rails, but it's, to your point, it seems like it's much more efficient to do it through the circuit court. So, my last question, until I turn it back over, but I do have one other legal question, but it's unrelated, but I really want to get your take on it because it's something that it just like it needs to be talked about briefly. Has there been any suggestion from the current sitting members of the Orphans Court to say, what, it shouldn't be an elected position. Why don't we just do like a lot of the other judgeships? And I personally believe that any judgeship should be appointed. The two things that I've always said as far as, and you don't have to touch this if you don't want, Byron, but the two reforms that I've always said all the way up to the Supreme Court is they should be appointed. They should have term limits. Those have been my, big two. I won't go any deeper on the Supreme Court, but because you're absolutely right, your point's well taken. But has there been any suggestion from the current members or their advocates, out there to just say, okay, fine, it shouldn't be elected. Let's take politics out of it, make it an appointed position?
Yeah. No, the judges. I think I've heard. Let me take that back. From the Orphans Court judges, there are some who believe that, some agree with the idea of changing the name of the court so it's more understandable for people, so to change it to probate court. But there's a lot of pushback from traditionalists, so that's not something that they're unanimous about. There has been some desire to make them nonpartisan elections, which I agree with, but I also don't agree that they should be elected to begin with. But again, there are some judges in some jurisdictions who get elected because of their party, and so they don't want to make that change. And most recently, the judges have pitched one of the things that they want is to make their terms 8 years instead of 4. So they'd be the only elected officials in the state with an 8-year term. It's really bizarre. And none of these things really get to this is all nibbling around the edges, to a bigger problem. And I am the kind of person, like, I do not like piecemeal change. I think that if you see 100 cracks in a system, don't pull out the spackle and mortar or whatever. Let's just, it's easy to try to make small little fixes here and there. It's hard to say, that's such a reflexive way that people do. Especially Steve, you've been involved in county government, intimately for a long time. There is such a natural, inclination to compromise for the sake of compromise, not because it's the right thing to do, not because it's looking long term, but just because it's easy and it's going to offend the fewest people. And you both know me. I don't shy away from why do we want 80% when we can have 100? Let's go for the gold. And if we come a little short, that's fine. But let's not start off. I mean, this is like negotiating one-on-one. Why do we kind of handicap ourselves to begin with? So I don't, some of those things like nonpartisan elections, fine. But the idea of them being appointed, I mean, a lot of them, especially those that have some kind of political clout, whether it's because of their connections with elected officials or because they're a well-known family in their jurisdiction, whatever it may be, they don't want to be appointed. And especially, one of the things too is that they've tried to. One other issue is that in the 19 counties in Maryland where the judges aren't required to be lawyers, I think it's only 2 or 3 counties where you are actually even allowed to be a lawyer and serve on the court. Howard County and I think Calvert County are the exceptions, and maybe Anne Arundel, but in like Frederick County, you can't be a practicing lawyer and be an orphans court judge. In Howard County, you can be a practicing lawyer and be an orphans court judge as long as you aren't dealing with probate matters in your practice. So I can be a divorce lawyer. Our former Chief Judge, Sheree McNeil, was a family law attorney. So her work life her legal practice had nothing to do with her job. There was no conflict. Some of the judges have said, well, why don't we just, to try to recruit some better candidates, try to get more lawyers to run for these positions, which would be a good thing. Why don't we create an exemption statewide so that any lawyer anywhere in Maryland can run for orphans court and they can continue their practice as long as they're not dealing with probate matters in their practice. And there's been a lot of pushback from the non-lawyer judges. They say, so basically we're just trying to open up the pool of candidates to get, to open it up to broader, and they can't even agree to that. Which is really a shame. But this all gets back to sort of just protecting the status quo and protecting people who are in positions that are comfortable.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. Like I said, I have one question unrelated to this, but it's just one that I wanted to ask you because I've seen some of your advocacy online. But Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you for questions regarding this particular question, as it were, on the ballot.
I guess move towards ramping up, Byron. I mean,
yep.
one of the things that we talked earlier about the election of these judges, and it's essentially a fait accompli that these 3 are going to get elected, except if, of course, the referendum passes and then the referendum takes effect. But an activist colleague of ours, who I will not say her name, but we all know who she is, had made a suggestion to me recently of just simply not voting for the judges of the orphans court in order to kind of show a protest about everything that we've talked about today, about just how simple, ridiculous the whole orphans court has become. And I could remember other people, some great names in the past. Byron, you mentioned Ms. McNeil. I'm thinking about former state delegate Frank Turner, a very nice lady in Elkridge named Peggy Ford, another very smart gentleman, Frank Chase, who was a judge of the orphans court. And these were all people who cared. Again, not to cast aspersions about people on the court now, but this current example with this candidate, suggests that perhaps orphans court isn't bringing out the best and the brightest of Howard County. Do you think that there's any, how do you feel about like what would be this symbolic thought of just not voting for orphans court?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like they need to check off every box all the way down their ballot. That's not everyone, of course. As we all know, people drop off. Every successive office on the ballot, people drop off. I'll just say, like, when I vote in November, I'm not going to be voting for any of the judges, the candidates, because I feel like it's disingenuous. I'm voting to and advocating for eliminating this position entirely. So for me, it's a matter of number one, not going to get into each individual candidate, but I did raise an ethical issue with one of them. I mean, what we have in front of us, you're right, it's a fait accompli that these three individuals will be elected. But I mean, here we are, a year since this debate really began, when the delegation first proposed it last December. And, again, the argument from the opponents to this referendum was, there's no need for us to abolish this court. We just need to elect better people. Well, we have three candidates running, and I'm not going to name names. One of them has a lawyer who regularly goes before the court as her treasurer, which I think creates an appearance of impropriety. That's, I think, a serious problem. And then you've got two other candidates, one who's an incumbent and one is a former incumbent who was unseated in the last election by the incumbent. If you think the two of them are going to get along, you're crazy. And then between the three of them, one of them is going to be the chief judge. I mean, this is exactly the problem, is that this is people should not rely on a roll of the dice for whether we have a system that that functions on a basic human level. I mean, I can tell you that if these three individuals are elected and the referendum fails, this is going to be an unmitigated disaster. Mm-hmm. Every single week is going to be a knockdown, drag out fight between the three of them. And that's the problem. That's what we've been dealing with for decades now. And it's not just Howard County. I mean, this is a local issue, but, I mean, there was another jurisdiction a few years ago where an orphans court judge was appointed to fill out the term of a vacant position. And the chief judge of that court and this new judge, their relationship was so hostile that the new judge, on doctor's orders, was told to not be in the physical presence of her colleague, that it caused her such stress and anxiety that they needed to make arrangements for doing their work outside of each other's physical presence. And so, this kind of, it's been acutely problematic in Howard County, but we're not alone. We're the only county that has felt like we need to take this bold step. But again, it's a systemic problem. So I will not be voting for any of the candidates running. I will be penciling in or penning in that dot next to yes on question 5 very darkly, and encouraging my friends all over the state to do the same thing, because we have moved beyond this being a choice to it being a necessity, in my view.
And so last question, Byron, and I think I know the answer because I've done my looking. I don't see any organized opposition or proponency to question 5 anywhere.
So we're going to be launching a website very soon that's going to have everything we've talked about today and more on it. So history of the court, what are the problems? How will question 5 solve those problems? How do you vote? How will this actually play out? It will debunk a lot of the claims made by opponents about this, that it's going to overwhelm the circuit court. Their biggest argument is, basically there's nothing to see here. It's always what you want to hear from government, right? Every part of government can always do better. That the public is totally happy with this system. That this is a backdoor effort to get rid of all the orphans courts. None of this is true. And so we're going to make sure that people have the facts. So that's going to be coming out soon. And that's in part because there is one judge in another jurisdiction who has made it her mission to try to stop this. And shocker that it's a lay judge in a county over 100 miles away from here. Totally, there's a serious ethical issue, I'll just add, with judges weighing in on public policy issues. Not supposed to do that. But I'm starting to hear some talking points coming out of them that's being disseminated in some, email threads and stuff like that. I've been trolled a little bit on Twitter by someone from the shore about this issue, and it's all nonsense. And we want to make sure people have the facts. It's just, to me, what's interesting is that this is a simple local issue But there are some folks who just, and we've seen this in Howard County too. Even for, I wish that members of our party would not look at people on the other side of their aisle and their propensity to buy into whatever conspiracy theory you throw in front of them. But that's increasingly, we can have a whole other hour-long conversation about that. But that's part of the issue here, is that we've got some people who they view this as some sort of nefarious effort to get rid of all the orphans courts in Maryland, and that's not true. This really is an acute issue here, and we know it will work here by making this transition. So that's why we're moving forward with this. So again, long story short, I'm not going to be voting for any of the judges because I think it's disingenuous. But people are free to do whatever they want. As the practical effect of this is that simultaneous with the election of these judges is the effectiveness of the amendment. So they will actually, the judges who win will never be seated. So the current judges' terms will play out through the end of December 3rd is the end of our term. So they will complete their term on December 3rd. December 3rd, the circuit court will take over.
It's the magic of democracy. They'll just poof. Steve, you bring us home with your questions, sir.
Okay. Unrelated. Well, first of all, Byron, thank you for being on the show and giving us that insight. I look forward to the website. Please let us, provide it to us.
Absolutely.
Online. Obviously, I follow you on some of the social media channels. I'll share it. And you're right. We could have another hour with you to talk about, I'd love to talk to you about so many of the human rights issues that are going on in this country. No secret, Mr. Register, member of the LGBTQ plus community. But I think right now what's going on affects, women, people of color like myself. I mean, there are so many issues out there that we could talk about, even here in the county. I saw recently a post from you about the response to a certain sign in schools that say, everybody's welcome. A simple message.
Apparently that's really offensive to some people.
Yeah, people lost their minds over a simple sign that said all students are welcome here. I saw your response, Byron. It was great. But speaking of schools, as we get into the school system, there was, God, I hope so, the conclusion of a lawsuit that attempted to take away the voting rights of a student member of the Board of Education. I know you had a lot to say about that. And a lot to say about the recent decision. Just very quickly, if you want to touch on that. And again, I don't know if there's any other recourse for these individuals. I hope there's not, because this should have been over a long time ago. But just a quick thought on that.
Yeah, I think that, we've unfortunately gotten to a point, I think, in Howard County, and Bill, you've been active, or, Steve, you too, you have some Howard County historical knowledge that goes back before me. But I mean, I grew up here, and when I was first getting involved, I think the first election that I was really kind of aware of what was going on was 1998. And so this was a turning point in the county where we had been red for 8 years, right? We had a Republican county executive, we had a Republican county council. Our courthouse was a bunch of Republicans. We had, I think the majority of our delegation was Republican at the time. I know we had Republican state senators. I'm remembering Chris McCabe and Marty Madden, and probably not even welcome in their party anymore these days. But we have transitioned from, we are almost at one party rule. And so, what have we seen from the other side? They can't win elections. And so what do they resort to? Well, we're just going to sue whenever we're not happy with the policy decision that's come up. And there's a lot here that's steeped in privilege. We've got people, private citizens who have enormous resources. And so they just clog up our courts. I mean, it's no secret that I and 3 other local progressives have been sued by a local Republican for daring to use our First Amendment right of free speech. And fortunately, 2 of these cases were easily dismissed. But it's basically, the local mantra for conservatives is, we're going to try to win elections. We know we're going to lose most of them. So what are we going to do instead? We're going to whine and complain on social media. And they have no shortage. I mean, the proliferation of innocuous sounding families unite, parents represented and reopen and all this kind of stuff. They really should just have one page because they are all one and the same. But that's, it's a lot of hand wringing and lying on social media, and it's suing, and it's tying up our, I wish that in this case with the student member of the board, this was a losing case from the beginning and everyone knew it. How much did it cost the school system to defend that lawsuit? And I wish these people had to pay that, because it's not just the money, but it's also the dragging the community through. The conservatives always claim that it's Democrats who are being divisive about everything. Well, it's pretty divisive to file a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of having a voting student member of our board. And it was so obviously transparent. It wasn't about this office as a institution. It was about one particular student member of the board who was voting a way that they simply didn't like. And there's something very ugly about that. So they can keep filing all these lawsuits. It's not helpful to our, comedy as a community. Ultimately, they keep failing. But this sort of knee-jerk, I don't get my way, I'm going to sue, is not how we should be trying to resolve our issues as a community. And I'm glad that, at least recently, the right has prevailed, and I hope it continues to.
No, I appreciate that. And I threw that out there because, speaking of the caseload of our courts, and we've talked about how the orphans court caseload would have a, negligible effect on that. A case like this does. So that's why I wanted to throw that out there, because it does take up a lot of time and bandwidth of a court that certainly has its limits as far as how much it can take. So thank you for the answer on that. And for some of the other issues you talked about. Again, love to have you on to talk about a whole range of other more political matters. But with that, Bill, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up.
Yeah, we could spend several volumes of this podcast talking about the ignorance and avarice of the nouveau Howard County landed gentry, but we shall defer that for other times. But Byron, I would like to thank you also for joining us. Always informative and interesting. And so thank you for helping get out the word about question 5 and why people across the state of Maryland should vote in favor of it, and reform Howard, the way that Howard County manages, to serve its citizens who are going through a very hard time. The death of a loved one, assuming duties and roles and responsibilities that they may not know, days before that they have. There's a desire for firm and steady hands there. That's the best way to do business. And I thank you for recognizing that and for standing up for it. So thank you. So Steve, anything in closing or any updates on Poe?
I've not seen any. Like I said, I think we're waiting for the Harbaugh presser on Monday to find out. But hopefully everybody enjoyed that little bit of levity. But again, just thank you to our Register of Wills. Great conversation, important conversation. Hopefully people learn something about what is the judge of orphans court, the relationship with the circuit court, what a mess this whole concept is and why it needs to be changed. Bill, you and I, again, no secret, we both agree that this question, the answer should be yes. So I will certainly be doing these same markings that you do, Mr. Register. So looking forward to that conversation. Again, once the website's available, we'll put that out there. So thank you very much.
Steve. If you do get any Poe news, do let us know. I know you have sources at the sports medicine clinic at Union Memorial. Dr. Lou Sean is a close friend of yours, so please feel free to let us know. So for Steve Hunt, my name is Bill Woodcock. You have been watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. Not sure what we're doing next week because it's Labor Day holiday. We'll figure that out. But we will be back to you in either 1 week, maybe 2. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.